place to be is living free in Tennessee.
Well, welcome to Living Free in Tennessee, where we talk about building the life you choose on your terms. Today is Monday, January 20th, 2025. This is episode 994 of Living Free in Tennessee. We're scooting right up on episode 1,000, guys. It's coming fast. I don't have anything in mind special for it this time. I usually do these benchmark episode celebrations, but I've been really focused on lambing season this year, which came on us a little bit early. It was 9 degrees last night. Everybody made it through the night, so I'm super happy about that. Anyway, what are we going to talk about today? Today, we're going to talk about how to plan your kitchen garden. I know at 9 degrees, you're probably thinking, why am I planning my garden? Because you're stuck inside. That's why you're planning your garden. I'm going to take it from the perspective of replacing dependence on the grocery store. So we'll talk a little bit about kitchen garden planning and your various goals, but I'm going to go a little deeper on the I want to replace my food and eat seasonally perspective than the I want to grow a tomato now and then perspective. I will also cover our usual segments, tales from the Prepper Pantry, the Frugality Tip, we have a shopping report in from Joe today, and Operation Independence. Before we do that, though, I want to talk about our featured event of today's show, and that is the April 24 through 26 Living Free in Tennessee Spring Workshop. This is at my place, and we do it once a year. And this year, I am honored to have Alan Booker in, who is like a top-notch permaculturist. He's going to do 2 half-day sessions. We're going to have John Pagliano. We're going to have Patrick Rohrman. We're going to have Joel Riles. We're going to have a whole bunch of really cool people. Don Gorham has agreed to speak, and other topics that I think you're going to want to participate in. And this year we're going to be doing breakout sessions, just rather than, because we've had like simultaneous sessions year over year. This year we're doing breakout sessions, the last session of the day, which is 5:30 to 6:30. So you may have to choose between, do I want to learn how to can, or do I want to learn how to make a rabbit cage, or do I want to do a property walk with Tactical to see all of the erosion remediation projects that have been underway. So that's how it's going to flow this year. And it's at livingfreeintennessee.com. If you go in the upper navigation or the hamburger menu on your cell phone and click Spring Workshop, that is where all the information is being gathered as it comes together. I will have the full agenda by the end of this week, but I wanted to make sure you save the date on that because I'm going to start selling tickets on February 1st. And we usually sell pretty quickly. So just wanted to get your minds moving in that regard. I also want to thank our 2 sponsors of today's show. The first sponsor of today's show is John Pagliano and the Wealth Studying Podcast. John is going to be doing a session at the Spring Workshop called Build Generational Wealth Through Permaculture Practices or Concepts, something like that. Anyway, it's going to be really cool. But he has a great podcast called the Wealth Studying Podcast that you can listen to for free by going to your podcatcher and downloading it, or go to investablewealth.com, click on podcast, and it will connect you with all the episodes you want. Our second sponsor of today's show is Discount Mylar Bags. Toby from Discount Mylar Bags is a fellow Tennessean who I know personally, and he reached out to sponsor the show before we were doing sponsors. So when we finally launched sponsorship, I did loop him in. He was one of our first sponsors, and he sources Mylar bags and other food storage items in bulk and then passes those savings on to you. It's his secret power. Check that out at discountmylarbags.com. If you are a member, you do have a discount at Discount Mylar Bags. Might as well use it, right? So those are our sponsors of today's show. I do want to mention that the schedule starting this week may be a little higgly for about a week. I am flying to California on Thursday to help take care of my mom, who is having a knee replacement. And I plan to have all scheduled shows, but if something with that goes a little weird, we may move some things around. We shall see. But I will be in California where the wildfires are, not really close to them though. And that starts. So Friday's show, if for some reason I need to be at the hospital with mom, not that we expect that to happen, may get hijacked by a redneck, for example. So just be a little flexible with me as I go through this next week, and we will get through it. I did want to share some listener feedback too before our first segment of today's show. So I've been getting different versions of this question from listeners for the last 3 or 4 weeks, like a lot. And the question is, I want to move to Tennessee. We've decided to move from insert state X to Tennessee. Where should I look? I'm coming down to visit. Now, the person who reached out to me today on a side channel was coming out of a Midwestern state and plans to spend the whole month of March in Tennessee, checking it out before they decide if they're going to move. And that's a really smart thing to do, is to spend time in the area you're going to move to. But I want to just go top line advice. If you're looking to move somewhere, if you can do it, this is what I think you should do. First of all, if you want to look at a state like Tennessee or any other state, great. Look at it and assess it from the outside for, land value, tax structure, lifestyle, connection with things you like to do. Like if you like to go to the ballet, is there a ballet? If you think you're going to need hospital services, are there good hospitals in the state, or do you need to fly to another state to get care? Those sorts of things. Like do a good old-fashioned assessment of where it is. What's the job market like? Do you need to have a job while you're here, or will your job come with you? And once you have that done, you still don't know where you want to live. And the reason you don't know where you want to live is you haven't been there yet. Okay, so go for a visit. Absolutely. I say rent an Airbnb so you get more of the neighborhood experience if you can. Find one in a neighborhood if you can. But if you want to stay in a hotel, that's fine too. And make sure you get out to events while you're there that are around the topics that you're interested in. If you're like all in on golfing, then go to some golfing events. If you're doing this because you want to build your homestead, look at the homestead events that are in the area, sign up for them and go and meet other homesteaders in the area. You may find a Homesteaders Alliance meetup. You may find an event like My Spring Workshop or like Self-Reliance Festival, or like the different meetups that different Freedom Cells do. I think Kerry Brown has one at his farm every quarter that you can go to and just meet other homesteaders. See if you like them. I know that Brad has one out in Spencer, Tennessee that he does once a month. Those are gold for getting to know people. Go to the farmers markets and get to know those homesteaders, right? Do that and you'll have a better idea of what's where. And then when you're ready to move, if you can, rent for 6 months to a year. Don't buy a place if you don't have to buy a place immediately. And here's why. I mean, unless you're moving a bunch of livestock and just can't find that kind of rental, and I get it in that case, when you move somewhere and you're there day to day, you start developing patterns, and your patterns will tell you where you want to live. So if you move, let's say, to where I am in DeKalb County, Tennessee, and you are renting and you hate the county, it's a relatively small thing to just move. Oh, okay, well, I'll finish out my lease and then I'm going to look somewhere else. And while you're living in this place you don't like, you can be looking at other places you do like. Or, man, I've made some really good friends out in West Tennessee near Camden, for example. I guess I'll go look near Camden. That sort of thing happens a little bit more organically better. When I was helping executives expatriate, so come from our country into other countries for work, we would prepare them with some cultural training, like how the cultures are different, but also encourage them to rent for 6 months somewhere if they could, and they didn't have to like lock into a 5-year lease somewhere. Do that. Figure out where you want to be. Figure out the restaurants you like to go out to if that's what you do. Figure out all of that stuff. Figure out the lake you like to recreate on. That's why I'm here, by the way. And then look for your more permanent living situation. That does a couple of things. It gets you more oriented on the culture and the people that you like in different areas. It gets you more oriented on what sorts of characteristics you might be looking for in a homestead. So in Tennessee, you don't know what you don't know until you live here, and then you know a whole lot, right? So we can advise you till the cows come home, but you may end up somewhere where the cows don't come home on accident because you didn't realize that it turns into an oven and doesn't rain for 4 months in this one particular little place in Tennessee. We have a really interesting weather pattern here, by the way, where it's not just like regionally it does this. It's very spotty. So I've had years where it rained all around me regularly all summer long, and we got 0 rain for 4 months. Here, a mile away, it would be raining. So that's something to know. And are you in one of those areas? Is it a rain shadow, for example, that there's something that typically takes the rain before you get it? Well, that's going to make a big difference if you've bought a property that doesn't have a spring or a creek or a water source, and then you were planning on doing rainwater collection and you get half the rainfall of a place a mile away from you, for example. Or if you're deep in a holler like I am and there's a microclimate, because we have a lot of variation in our climate and like the climates here. If you're deep in a holler, then like we'll stay frozen way longer than everybody else right now. Like roads were clear for days and I still had ice here. So that happens. But also sometimes when we get really like crazy ice storms, it kind of misses down. We get some, but it's way worse up on the ridge where the wind is. And we get a little less cold here because we're a little bit insulated. So those sorts of things are things that you start learning when you're in an area. So that's just my thoughts on if you're relocating, tap into the community as much as you can. And rather than wish you could go to some of these events, like go. I don't care whose events. Like Exit and Build is at Polyface Farms in Swoop, Virginia in May. That gives me an excuse to go to Swoop, Virginia in May and like check it out. See if you like the area. It's kind of cool over there, actually. Just saying. Okay. So it's time for our first segment of today's show, and that's Tales from the Prepper Pantry. This is where we talk about using what you store and storing what you use. And I want to give out a big shout out and thanks to Ryan Steva, the homestead consultant today. He came out on Friday, which was not his original plan. And he's been helping me get the Prepper Pantry put back together after a roof replacement. And he made sure it was insulated enough that we do not have frozen pipes right now. So I had a plan Friday that Tactical and I were going to do what we could to make sure that any openings between the pantry and my attic space and stuff like that were closed up with insulation. And then I got a text Thursday night saying, hey, if you get the shopping list at Lowe's, which included insulation, I can spend a day getting things more buttoned up there than they are. And he did. So I really appreciate him doing that. The Prepper Pantry stayed above 40 degrees last night, and it was 9 degrees here. And, in contrast, the utility closet got down to 34 degrees. That's where our solar system is, and Tactical's pipes. Pump house got down to 36 degrees. So, and those are already sort of insulated in. So it's really made a huge difference to have like the foam board insulation on the concrete block, as well as to have the insulation in the rafters and no pass through from the attic to the Prepper Pantry, which means someday soon I may be able to actually move things back into the Prepper Pantry, which would be amazing. Homegrown Cooking had our monthly episode in January, last Friday at 4 p.m. Friday was a doozy of a day. I felt like I was just running from one thing to another. And then it was like 4 p.m. time to cook a cow's heart. I better brush my hair because I've been in the pasture, like dealing with stuff. So Dawn was really understanding about that. So we did beef heart together, and she tasted beef heart on camera for the first time. That is over at the Living Free in Tennessee YouTube channel. I'd like to work with her to figure out how to get it on her channel too. So I'll be following up with Dawn on that this month. And our next month one is going to be, she's going to cook kidney steak stew. Because she's like, I got kidneys. I don't know what to do with them. And I'm like, I got nothing. So part of what we're starting with is we are cooking the parts of the animal that most people put off cooking to get it done and to see if they taste good. And like there are parts I've been eating for years. Kidneys are not something I've ever figured out how to cook. So we'll see. Because I don't have any kidneys, though, I'm going to show you how I make meatballs. So we'll do a meatball recipe while we're there as well. As I get ready for this trip to California, I have a little cooler that fits in an overhead bin, and I will be bringing that cooler packed with meat from my freezer just to keep two things: disciplined on using the food I have rather than buying things unnecessarily. And I find that the quality meat I get locally is better than what I can buy at the store. So while I certainly can fly somewhere and buy a steak or whatever, almost all the time the steaks in my freezer are better. So I have found that just bringing that little cooler, super helpful to get from here to there. And I'm hoping to come back from California with avocados, which should be in season while I'm there. So that's always a fun thing too, is come back with a bunch of avocados and then make guacamole, or just mix it with lemon juice and mash it up and then store it in the freezer for the summertime when I want guacamole with my salsa. Of course, now that we're eating keto, I don't do the corn chips very often, but from time to time, I will admit that does happen here as well. The freezers are all done. So I've been talking for weeks about doing this freezer thing. The freezers are reorganized. And we're ready for incoming rams. And Tactical doesn't know it, but they called me and said the lambs are ready as of Thursday this week. They just got cut today. So she's like, pick them up anytime after Thursday. They don't like to send you home. Like they're in the freezer now. And for some reason, they always want, I wonder why she wants 3 extra days. That seems like a long time. But they like them solidly frozen in their freezers. Oh, I know why. Because they put them in a block, I guess, in the crates. So to get my cow frozen quickly, she had it all spread out. Anyway, they like it solidly frozen before you take it home, or else it can drip blood from the bags in your coolers and it's messy. And that's fine. I mean, especially for these, I want to make sure they're 100% frozen before we go pick them up. And then we'll have the people who bought lamb meat from us pick up their animals or arrange to meet me, however they want to do that, however we figure it out, and go from there. So that happened pretty quickly. I'm super stoked about it. Okay. Weekly shopping report is next. This is from Joe, and Joe missed a few weeks. He said one of the times he missed it was because he accidentally forgot to take the notes out of his pocket and then washed his pants. So he couldn't do that week. So this is from this last weekend based on some videos from a few prepping channels. I'm trying to be more attentive to shortages, but I haven't seen anything remarkable other than the limit of 2 on eggs at Aldi. So the Dollar Tree was first. Stock is always changing there. There's no vacant areas, and I didn't see duplication being used to hide low stock. The drink selection remains good, and the food coolers are mostly full. We did not go into Home Depot, but the online price of a 2x4x8 is $3.85. Aldi was our last stop. We found what we wanted. Staple prices were bread, $1.39, eggs, $4.17, and there's a limit of 2. Whole milk, $2.87, that's down. Heavy cream may never go down in price again, guys. $5.39. Orange juice, $3.69. Butter, $3.79. Bacon, $3.99. Potatoes, no tag. Sugar, $2.99. Flour, $2.35. That's up. So sugar and flour up. 80% lean ground beef was $3.79. That's actually down a little bit. Untainted regular unleaded was $3.59. The regular gasoline is $2.79. So that's the report from Joe. Next up, we have a frugality tip from Margot. And here's what Margot has to say. Today's a short and sweet, simple tip. Whenever you're out shopping or whatnot, I pack a small cooler with drinks and a reusable ice block. I also keep an extra insulated tumbler full of water in the car at all times. Stopping to grab a drink adds up quickly, especially with someone that drinks soda. So stop yourself from grabbing that convenience shop overpriced drink and just pack a small cooler. Happy saving, y'all. Okay, next up, we have Operation Independence. This is where I talk about building local ongoing revenue into our lives. And we have 4 rams valued at $1,200 have been processed. And that helps offset taking care of the sheep, right? So that is the big income generating thing of the last 3 weeks has been sheep. In fact, we are taking deposits on the October sheep that are just babies right now that'll be processed in October 9th, I believe is the day they get processed. Those have been selling like hotcakes too. So it turns out people want lamb meat this year. And it's funny because in former years it sold quickly, but also slowly, if you know what I mean. Like I only had 1 or 2 and now I have 10. So it's interesting to see that ramping up. And I wonder if that's because of the perceived war on meat, or if it's, like mine are not vaccinated, so people are really hesitant to buy the vaccinated meat. I'm not sure what the impetus for it is, but I'm thankful for it. And we're excited to get the ram meat business. It's not just rams, it's lambs. Actually, it's girls and boys for this next round. We're excited to get that going a little bit more methodically than it has been, because it's like the first couple of years, I wasn't sure how big they'd be. I wasn't sure of the timing of all the things. And I feel like we have a good system now, even if we do have unexpectedly early bursts. It's not the end of the world, though, because then we have a bit of an early, like October is actually a really good time to get a processing date. December is a little bit harder because people process a lot of cows in December. So anyway, it's fun seeing that come together. And I'm very thankful that we've invested so much time into it. But the ramp up time for that's been a couple years from us, guys. Just if you're thinking of doing your own lamb business at some point, something to pay attention to. In fact, I'm doing a session at the Living Free in Tennessee Spring Workshop, lessons learned from 3 years of raising sheep. That's going to go over business side, care of them, learning the first aid, birthing season. There's going to be a segment on fencing. Tactical is going to have to do that because he does most of the fencing stuff. So that'll be at the spring workshop as well. Okay, with that, it's time for the main topic of today's show, planning your kitchen garden. So how many of you, just say Y or N in the comments, how many of you already have like your garden stuff under control? It's ready to go, and you should be giving this presentation instead of me. Just curious. And then, people then madly scramble for their phones. A lot of people come into homesteading kind of on the new side, and then the first question is how do I start a garden? We get a lot of that. Haas says he's just starting. And the advice I see in homesteading groups online, we're getting some more ends, is often way more complex, I think, than it needs to be for people who are starting at first. And in fact, we can make it more complicated for ourselves just by overcomplicating it. It's that let's overthink the homestead garden so I don't have to do the other stuff, right? Well, this time of year, when you do get snowed in and other things, it's a great time of year to think about your kitchen garden and how you're going to execute it. And what I mean by kitchen garden isn't just herbs, I mean the vegetables too. But I don't mean like long-term fields of wavy grain or whatever. So I'm talking about the garden that's going to end up being near your house, by the way, just for clarification. So when I think of a kitchen garden, I think of sort of two perspectives on the kitchen garden, right? And that's what you're using it for. One, you can use it to replace fresh vegetables in the season that they grow, not change how you eat, and buy things at the grocery store that are quote unquote fresh that have been shipped in from the other hemisphere or from California out of season. That's one way to approach it. Versus planning your kitchen garden to support a seasonal living or seasonal eating lifestyle. So if you're going to plan your kitchen garden, I think the first question you should be asking yourself is, what is my goal with the kitchen garden? Is it to get some vegetables in season, which reduces my overall grocery store? Like both of these reduce your dependence on the grocery store, guys. One reduces it more than the other. Is it to reduce it overall in season, and then in the winter I'm going to buy what I buy and that is what it is? Or am I looking for a more regenerative lifestyle where I eat things fresh in season, and then if they're not in season, I'm not eating them? Either goal is fine. I'm not going to judge you. You shouldn't judge you. Either goal is absolutely fine. Here, the goal is to replace most of our food and to eat seasonally. And I come at it from the perspective that things that are ripe at a certain season are also what I should be eating for this climate in that season. I also come at it from the perspective that it's more nutritious to tap into the land and have it as fresh as it can possibly be when I can do that, so that it's not being shipped all over the place, questionably raised, and losing vitamins at every turn. Because getting vitamins from your food, I think, is the best way to do it. So for me here, the goal is to replace most food by growing our own or sourcing it locally. Not so much to get some really good fresh tomatoes in August, which is what my goal was in Portland, Oregon, by the way. I grew a vegetable garden there, and my goal there was just, at the time of year when fresh stuff comes off the garden, I get fresh stuff. That was it. And the thing to think about when you're doing this is if your goal is to change to eating seasonally, then planning your garden isn't the only thing you need to do, right? You need to dramatically adjust what you eat when, and combinations of things. Like I often joke that a very famous combination that you can totally achieve in Oregon are peas and carrots in milk. Like that's a dish. You add garlic. It's delicious. I rarely get peas and carrots here at the same time. And so I sort of joked when I was talking originally about making Cook with What You Have, which is sort of a seasonal eating cookbook. It's not like based around that premise. It's based around what do you have? Let's figure out how to cook that, right? But that's the question you need to be asking yourself when you're eating a season. And I joked because like the peas carrots thing, unless I've been storing carrots here all winter long, it's not happening. Like I'm not getting my new carrots just yet when I'm already getting my peas. So that means I have to adjust my expectation on what I'm doing with peas when I eat them fresh and what I'm doing with carrots when I eat them fresh. And likewise, in the height of summer, I'm not getting lettuce from outside. Even some very heat hardy lettuces are like, I'm done. It's too hot here, lady. You need to be eating your summer squash and your tomatoes and your Swiss chard and your longevity spinach and your Malabar spinach and all the things that do well in a hot climate. So, what's your goal? That's the first question. Are you replacing most food by growing your own and changing your lifestyle, or are you going to source locally as best you can and then in the wintertime do those other things? If you're looking to replace all your food and you have a largely grain-based diet, do you have the space to grow the grain? Because in some regions of the United States, you can source locally produced grain fairly easily and continue a grain-based diet. But I don't see a lot of sources for locally grown grain here. It's possible, but unless you have if you want to grow your own, unless you have acres and acres and acres to grow that on, then you're probably not going to grow that. Plus, the practices you need to grow the grain successfully are not necessarily what we're talking about today. And it kind of drives you more towards monocropping at that point. Those midwinter bananas and apples and fresh summer squash are definitely not coming out of this region. And sugar, if you eat a lot of baked goods with sugar, where are you getting the sugar, right? It's just a shift in perspective. I like to use the seasonal eating method, and the way I see my vegetable garden or my kitchen garden is when planning what we're eating. First and foremost, I use what's here and ripe first. An example of that would be in another month, probably, or two, I'm going to have Swiss chard coming off the garden. Come heck or high water. I'm actually having to redo my chard because row cover blew off my garden and it's not doing well out there. So I'm going to have to start some more from seed and get it going. But what's going to happen is I will have a combination of the Swiss chard. I might have lettuce if I grow it. I don't know if I'm growing it this year or not. I haven't made that decision. I will also have availability of dead nettle from the yard, early plantain, so like baby plantain shoots. I will have some watercress returning to the creek, and I will have dandelion greens, and I will have other early spring foraging greens, basically. That's what's going to happen. So when I plan the side dish for dinner, I'm going to have a choice. Do I eat that stuff that's fresh, or do I eat stuff that's preserved from a seasonal eating standpoint? And sort of my rule of thumb is eat that stuff first for two reasons. One, the fresh stuff off your land is what you should be eating. And the stored stuff is what's keeping you alive, right? So like my green beans that are stored are keeping me alive, but I'm going to prioritize the greens until it's either too hard for me to get them or, something else. They run out. The patches are needing another week to regenerate themselves. A prime example of this in my house right now is bone broth. I have so many bones, and I'm making bone broth once a week in the crock pot. And then we're drinking bone broth during the day, like after morning chores, cup of bone broth because it's hot and it's cold out there. It's great. And I had this choice where I could make all of that in bone broth, and then like from the Prepper Pantry method, I need to can it and put it in the pantry and then take the stuff that's already canned out to use the old stuff first, right? Nope. I'm just drinking the bone broth fresh as I can. And if I can't make it, then I'm popping a jar and heating it. Preserve what makes sense. And what makes sense for you is different than what makes sense to me. So when you have a very successful garden and you have, 100 pounds of tomatoes to put up, are you really going to use those? That's the question to ask yourself. I would use those. You might not use those. Or did you grow a bunch of radishes and you want to preserve those in the freezer to use in stews in the future? Okay, but do you like radishes? No? Well, then why'd you grow them? And if you grew them and they were successful, and then you realize you don't like radishes, that's not something you should be preserving. That's something you should be giving to somebody who likes radishes, right? So, seasonal eating method. First, use what's here and ripe. Second, preserve what makes sense volume-wise for you and what you like. 3, tap into stored items when fresh is not available. Or frankly, because we like to enjoy our life. If you just want that salsa because salsa is delicious and it's canned and it's not officially on the list because there's something else you could just go ahead and eat the salsa, man. Got to have fun with this, right? So then you're going to want to develop and track a cycle of preservation. And this is where the Prepper Pantry method comes into play here, where you're storing what you use and using what you store. And then once a year, you're having a conversation with yourself. Do I still eat like this? How much of this do we use? Do we need more of that or less of that? It took me about 2 years to dial in how many green beans I needed to put up. And then somebody else moved to the hauler who likes them. And then that number had to double, right? Pay attention to what you really use each year. And then once you have a pretty good handle on that, tap into the waves of abundance that happen, because a garden every year is going to be a little bit different for you. One year, you'll see that it was like the last year was kind of the year of the tomato for a lot of people. Tomatoes in general did great once they started. Green beans, for many people I know, did not do as well. But the year before that was the year of the green bean. So when I'm planning and tapping into the garden abundance and deciding what to preserve, what I do is I preserve more than I need if it's a year of abundance for one thing. And when that happens, especially if you're gardening every year, you're just going to know, like, it's the year of the squash. You'll start seeing it when it happens. Okay, but stepping back to the kitchen garden, once you've sort of thought through all the goals and you've agreed to follow that method and you have an idea of what you think you want to store, really sit down, and you can do this in just an afternoon, and assess your needs. Calculate the amount of food that you guys eat, whether it's you alone, you and your family, and then how that lines up with dietary preferences. A typical example that you'll find that people bring up is, okay, so my family eats salads sometimes as with dinner. Okay. And we go through about 2 heads of lettuce a week. What that means from a gardening's perspective is I need 2 heads of lettuce coming off the garden a week. And to do that, I need to obviously plant 2 heads of lettuce every week in succession so that once a week one is ripe, right? Well, maybe not. When you plant 2 heads of lettuce, how many get hit by pests? How long will a head of lettuce stay ripe? How many weeks do you want to have that happen in succession? And in your climate, how long does lettuce do well? So once you've figured out, okay, to have 1 week of food stability in the lettuce department, I need 2 heads of lettuce. The next thing to do is to go look at the area and figure out, okay, so lettuce does well here March through June, and that's X number of weeks. And this is how many total heads of lettuce I need. And I think if I plant them in 2 waves, that I will get a better yield, right? And then you just go for that. So you just make a decision and go for it. It may not be the right answer long term, but the thing about gardening in your area and with your style is that you get to experiment year to year. That's just the way it is. So, or if you need 5 pounds of tomatoes a week, Are you going to succession plant the tomatoes every week? Another tomato plant that gives you 5 pounds? No, because what's going to happen is your tomato plants are going to catch up with your other tomato plants. And at the season, when everything's ripe on your tomato plant at once, they're going to be that way too. You can kind of succession plant tomatoes by separating them a few months apart. When I do that, I take a cutting off the tomato, I root it, and then I put it in for a fall. I do 2 cycles of tomatoes. But pretty much no matter what I've done with tomatoes, there is a time with tomatoes where all the tomatoes are ripe at one time and there are a lot of them. And that's why I can tomatoes at that time. In fact, I don't actually. I freeze them and I can them in the winter so that I can function static heat coming into my house from the canning. But I do process them at that point. And, lettuce will stop producing in very hot weather. You have the next thing to think about is, why are we eating that lettuce? Well, we're eating it because we want a leafy green side dish. Okay, well then look at location appropriate alternatives to the thing you're eating. So again, if you're transitioning from I can buy it fresh at the grocery store any time of year, but I'm going to just replace it for some times of year, that's one garden. But if what you're doing is replacing your need for leafy greens 3 times a week, what other leafy greens can you have? Swiss chard does better in the heat. It actually has a tendency to do pretty well through the cold, as does kale. I know, I said the K word. A lot of you don't like kale. That's okay. You don't have to, if you don't like it, don't grow it, right? Malabar spinach is a vining plant with these big, meaty, round leaves that are like spinach-ish that you can saute up as a side dish. Longevity spinach is the same way. You'll start seeing, if you tap into your local knowledge, which are your local homesteaders, what they're planting when, and you'll see them go through a whole bunch of vegetables you never even see at the store because they do better during this 4-week period of time or that 8-week period of time. So your location appropriate alternatives to the function of the food you're trying to replace is something to look at so that you can get that involved in succession planting. We're going to talk about succession planting a little bit later. And then when you have surplus, you can preserve it for the off season. Carrot and other root vegetables are really great at storage in a root cellar. And that's one way to actually push to get the carrots and peas combo I talked about earlier in Tennessee, is have the carrots you harvested in the fall ready for the early spring peas. Because peas need to go in the ground way earlier here than most people put them in. And, if we have an unusually cool spring, then you may get them later into the spring. But if we have the oven turn on early, which either of those things can happen, then the peas are like, I'm out. I'm done. Even if you have them in the north shady area. Like I've figured out all sorts of ways to get peas longer, but eventually when it's hot, they're just done. The other thing to think about is, once you have your garden, how are you going to integrate that into your local community or recompost it into your compost system? Because really, to have a successful kitchen garden, you need to have a successful soil garden. That's the first thing. And when you have that, you're less likely to be subject to pest pressure. Haas says, I love kale. Yeah, I like the red Russian kale. And I've had years where it does great here and years where it doesn't do as well. The best year of red Russian kale I had, mine bolted in the summer before. I forgot about it. I moved the garden to another location and I looked where it had been, and there was a patch of red Russian kale just growing there because it had gone to seed, dropped the seeds, and it was ripe in February. So that just informs you that your kale should already be in the ground and growing right now in Tennessee, even though there's ice out there. So that's, things to think about. So the other way to think about your assessment of how much of something you need is, how do I replace meals, right? So we already talked about it with the lettuce, but in season, when I'm growing green beans, I replace side dishes with the fresh stuff off the garden. And in season, I'm replacing every meal with something from the garden. Off season, when I have reserved stuff, if I have 1 quart of canned green beans, that replaces 1 meal. So if I put up 65 jars of green beans from my garden, then I've replaced 65 meal side dishes. Like the main dish I still got to deal with, but that's 65 worth of side dishes. There are 365 days in a year. So that almost feels like a failure, right? No, because in season, I went 2 to 3 months with green beans coming off the garden for side dish or for integration into sautés and that sort of thing. And really, it's from November through about mid-March that I'm actually replacing meals. And at that point, that's starting to add up pretty quickly. That's like a third, a little bit more than a third of the time that I need to replace the food. So it's that shift in seasonality perspective of my goal isn't the fresh thing at weird times of year. My goal is covering the meals in the years when stuff is not coming off the garden and then shifting what I eat when things are coming off the garden. At this point here with this thinking, 99% of the meat we eat here is from here or from this other guy I buy a cow from who lives here, right? Not here, but lives near me. That was the easiest thing to replace, guys, was local meat and eggs. So fast. And then dairy wasn't far behind. Like I could replace just about all my dairy if I would spend more time making cheese by just increasing time put in processing milk and increasing the milk I buy from the herd share that I'm in. It would be just about a done deal. And then I'd only be buying like random weird specialty cheeses that I really like. I haven't done that. Like I still buy, that's probably my weakest area would be dairy from the store right now. I get dairy from the farm, but I also get cheese products and those sorts of things from the store. So once you've figured out which meals you want to replace with your garden, then you can back it out, right? Then you back it out and you start choosing plants. Again, do not plant what you do not eat. Just because you can produce a lot of zucchini does not mean you should have zucchini in your garden if you don't like zucchini. And the way you figure out how many plants, then, if you're like, I need 20 pounds of green beans a year, is you take the packet, you look, and it says one plant yields approximately a pound of beans. So then you have to plant 20 plants, right? Wrong. The number on that packet is a number that you may or may not ever achieve. It could be higher what you get. It could be lower what you get. That is a guideline. If it's really important for you to replace 20 pounds of green beans, I would plant double the plants. I would go 40 plants and I would do my best to make sure my soil is as good as it can be. And I would nurture those babies. And then if I actually got the yield that they said I was going to get, then I would either sell or give away the surplus or, can if it's beyond what I'm going to can. So definitely use the packet as a guide for how much a plant can produce, but just know that what you need to know is what do you produce from that plant in your environment, because your environment's going to be different. So first year, I do about double what I think I need for planting. And then I learn. And some years you find out, turns out I'm really good at growing garlic. So I can actually get this one, I can get the garlic nailed, right? And you also that same year find out, turns out I'm not great at growing tomatillos. So I either decide I'm going to work on tomatillos or I change my tomatillo habit, right? Nobody wants green beans for everyday sides anyway. Yeah. Speak for yourself, buddy. I really like green beans a lot, but I'm a weirdo. But you're right. I don't eat it every single day. That's why we had Swiss chard. Like when I went into the fall, the way this looked was like Monday would be green beans, Tuesday and Thursday would be Swiss chard, and then Wednesday would be, I don't know, calla rice that I happen to have in the freezer, and then Friday would be random greens I found in the other aquaponics system. With what I learned was, and this is from Ken Ash, she was like, we just saute up sage by itself, and I was like, oh, that's pretty good. It's delicious. And I have so much sage coming off this property that's another one where you perceive it to be a spice, but you can actually use it as a side dish if you're going to have a side dish. And the other thing is we eat a lot of meals that are just meat. And so it's actually more important for us to have lambs born and stay alive, which is why I'm bottle feeding this little lamb whose mom is not producing enough milk. In fact, I think Tactical just got back from bringing a bottle out to the barn so that the twins could get a little supplement from their mom. We're leaving them on the mom so she continues to produce milk, but she's not having a good milk year. We'll just put it that. So yeah, yields per plant is a little bit of BS on the seed packets unless you are a seasoned gardener who can just nail it every time. So once you have this assessment and you're like, this is what I want for meals. This is how many meals a year I want to replace. This is how many pounds of this or that, or heads of lettuce, bunches of radishes, whatever it is you want. Then you go back and you look at that and you go, crap, I can't plant all that. And you can't. And then you use my 3 things method and you say, which 3 are most important to me? 1, 2, 3. That's what you do, especially in year 1. And if what's important to you is green beans, Swiss chard, and tomatoes, which is my 3 things for the kitchen garden, you make sure those get done, whether you're doing it from seed or buying the plants from the store or from somebody else. You plan the space with those as your centerpiece. And then you get into your garden layout with other things, because once you choose the my 3 things, it doesn't mean you only grow 3 things. It just means those are the top priority for production. And I want to augment it with other really delicious stuff. So then we get to garden layout, right? Garden layout, you're going to look at, okay, here are the spaces for my garden. And these spaces are closer to the house and these are a little further away. That is true in any garden. At my house, what I have is an aquaponics system with some soil-based growing media. Close to the house, a little further away, I have 4 or 5, I can't remember, raised beds. And 2 of those are planted right now. I got 4 right now. And 2 of them are closer to my house than the other 2. What that means for me is I'm more likely to interact with the 2 closest to the house than the ones a little further away. All of it's in my zone 1. It's just some of it's in the outer ring of zone 1. And the outer ring of zone 1 gets less attention than the inner ring of zone 1. That's right. I subdivide my zones here, and it's just because I know myself. And I know that while I'm on the phone with somebody, I may walk over and weed this garden. So when I look at the 3 things I like to grow, which of those require the most interaction? I can tell you which one it is tomatoes. Because tomatoes, for better production, require trimming and trellising and all of those things. So then I want to put the tomatoes in the plan closer. And then when I look at the bed and the fact that tomatoes get tall, I want to put them in a part of the bed that gets, that won't shade everything behind it. So if the sun is coming from the south primarily and then east to west, I'll put it more towards the north side of the bed, unless I'm purposely making a wall of tomatoes to shade something on the other side, like, oh, I don't know, peas, which also get tall. So you need to be careful about the spacing on that if you try to do that method with that. So I'm really looking at what function does the plant serve. And then I figure out where those plants are going to go. And from there, I then fill in with other plants like herbaceous plants, like basil's one I love to grow here, because it's easy to grow, it's delicious, and it just plants well. It companions well with the tomatoes and the other things I grow. Or I may want to put dill in, or I add the squashes. Now the squash plants, there are 2 kinds. Ones that are vining, that you either want to trellis them or have a lot of place for them to go. And then the ones that bush out, like your summer squashes, which end up, like 3 to 5 feet around with squash. So spacing is really important there. But when they're little, they actually benefit from a little bit of shade before they want straight up sun. So if you have another plant nearby that's going to be ripe sooner, like, oh, I don't know, a fennel plant, you can have a fennel plant near it and the squash, and then the fennel plant gets big enough to harvest, and it makes more room for the squash. So how scientific do you need to get with sort of that planning part of your garden? Meh. What I do is I take my 3 most important ones, and then I say, well, I want some of these other things like basil and fennel and squash, and sometimes tomatillos will get added to it, and peas, and I don't know what else. Like, I'll just go for a trip through the Baker Creek catalog and say, ooh, chamomile sounds nice. I'll do some of that. And then I get them ready, and I make the plants, and then I just put the shorter plants more towards the edges of my beds, which are raised beds. I tend to put the taller plants towards the middle, really tall plants further north than south, and then plants that are on the western side in my garden are the ones that I'm trying to shade. Here's why. They'll get the eastern sun, they'll get shaded from the eastern sun, and when the sun sets, at my place, there's a row of trees that also gives them shade. At your place, the opposite will happen. The western sun will burn them. So just think about that on your garden and where you put things. So once that's done, I look at it in waves like this. Early spring planting, I'm going to do brassicas. I know the tomato's going to go here, but it's not here yet because it's too cold. Brassicas are like broccoli, cabbage, that sort of thing. I'm going to have lettuces. I'm going to have Swiss chard. I'm going to get the peas in. I'm going to get the peas on a trellis. Usually that trellis is going to be down the middle of one of my raised beds. Then I'm going to throw some carrots in for good measure in that early spring. So early spring planting here started last week, but I didn't do it. So it'll really start around February 1st for me. And actually it's icy out there, so it doesn't matter, right? I'm going to get the radishes in at that time too. And then mid-spring, so March to April, I'll start thinking about, is it time to add transplants like a fennel transplant? Is it too early for basil? If it's going to frost, it's too early for basil, right? And I'm going to get some dill seeds in. I'm going to get cilantro plants transplanted. I'm going to get, what is that stuff? Parsley transplanted, those sorts of things. All the while knowing that this spot where I have the radishes, for example, is where a tomato is going to eventually go. So when it's time for the tomato there, I'm pulling it out. Or that spot is where the squash is going to go. Okay. And then the late spring planting, which is usually mid-April through June, is when I start doing things like the green beans, the squash seeds, the okra seeds, the tomato transplants, the basil transplants, things that can't get frost, the eggplants, all of that. And in order to make room for those, any of the early spring plants that haven't quite gotten there yet, I have to decide, do you move for this other thing and I just eat like the baby broccoli greens, or am I going to let you turn into your broccoli head, in which case I'm not putting whatever there that I thought I was going to put there. That's how I do sort of the 3 phases of planting. And how I plan for the succession planting is, when a plant's ripe, it's like, okay, there's a spot that's open. What's going to go there next? What other things are shading it? If they are, then that helps you get a baby plant up big enough, or you're just taking it out and making space for things that are going to get bigger. So that's the strategy for bringing it in. And I like to have a garden that has mixed things in beds. Although with my green beans, I will do a whole bed row of green beans. I'm actually planting fewer green beans this year than I have, because I like pole beans. I have them trellis up. Where those peas are, I usually do peas. And right about the time the peas are starting to get too hot, it's time to put the green beans in. Same trellis, right? They're coming up behind the peas because the peas aren't going to make it anyway. That's just what works well here. That may not work well where you are, but it's definitely worth a chance. And then as you look at your garden spaces, you're also going to find out you have other garden spaces you didn't realize you have near your house. You might have pots that would work really well. I realized that I need to shade my house from the sun in the south side. So I've built what I call the tomato wall, which is trellising tomatoes up the whole south side of my house, which is 50 feet long, with tomatoes that go up to the roof line. And then that keeps the sun from hitting my house, which keeps the house cooler, but also gives the sun to the tomatoes, which is absolutely ideal for that. So soil health is tantamount important. And if you're going to spend time on anything that's just intense time, worry more about making compost and learning how your soil patterns work and getting good activity in your soil than what you spray on the plant or keeping pests off plants. If you have a lot of pests in your garden, as much as it pains me to say it, it might be the year that you sacrifice the garden to recompost and get your soil healthier. rather than spend the whole time fighting it. I have, and this is coming from somebody who has spent years pulling squash bugs off of stupid squash leads with duct tape because the eggs will just stick to the duct tape, right? Um, interplanting is great. Succession is planting is great. And then in Tennessee, I play a game called Seed Roulette. So if I know that peas are going to go on this row, and I know that if I plant peas on January 15th, that they will germinate in about 2 weeks. And then we get a really crazy freeze and it drops to 9 degrees, which just destroys the seeds and any little shoots. I have another packet of those ready to go to do a second planting. So I start when I think I need to start with my seeds. And then I plant another set of seeds 2 weeks later, even if the shoots are up on a row like peas, for example. And then I do another planting 2 weeks after that. So it's a 6-week cycle for me here because our weather patterns in Tennessee are either heat's pushed up from the south or cold has pushed down from the north. And you don't know which year it's going to be. Even if they tell you which year it is, they are wrong a lot. So that's seed roulette. Seeds are cheap. And if that first set of shoots does well and the other ones come up and they're getting in the way, I pull them out. If that first set of shoots dies and the second ones come up a couple days after they've died, we're good to go. And then that second layer does it. And if the first and second get killed and the third one does it, then we're good to go. That's why I play seed roulette. I've done it for a long time. I do it with my tomato transplants, all of it. Like the only thing I don't have to do that with are the tomato transplants in my tomato wall because I can bring them inside and outside. So if we get a flukishly late frost out of nowhere in May, which has happened one time in 18 years, I was like, well, I guess all the tomatoes are coming in for the night and then they will go back out and they don't know what happened. They're just like, weird. Okay, whatever. Right? But that's just because I can move those. Usually when they're in the soil in your raised bed, I can't move those. So what about rotation on your garden? Do you need to put different things in different beds every year? Need is a strong word, but the reason people do that is pests that have come and then laid their eggs that they're particularly interested in a specific kind of plant, like a tomato or a green bean or a garlic or whatever, they already have their leg hold there. So when you're rotating to a different bed, that just reduces the chance of those pests finding it. Cover crops are a great way to keep your beds from having the kinds of weeds in there you don't want them to have, and they can really keep the microbiology going and keep the soil temperature just right. If you want to check out Jack Spirko's course at homefoodsystems.com, I recommend checking that out. He's been putting some really great classes out about building compost, doing biochar, and cover crops so that you have your soil really great. And then where do you get your seeds? I like to use Baker Creek and Seed Savers Exchange. Those are two that are easy to find, but also in our community, you will find people who sell seeds. I'm thinking of you, Mad River Seeds. So Mad River Seeds out of Washington State, I've put the link to their Etsy store here. They specialize in some really cool heirloom tomatoes, for example. Support people like that. They're doing the hard work to keep biodiversity in our seeds. The other thing is, if you're in a homesteader group, you can definitely tap into seed exchanges. And the thing about a seed exchange is if you don't have seeds to exchange, you should go anyway. Because usually what happens in the seed exchange is we all have way too many seeds. That's why we're there. And so it's not that I need to trade my tomato for your broccoli, right? It's that I want somebody to take my tomato seeds and I need some broccoli seeds. That's it. And if I don't have that first part of the equation, people aren't mad because you didn't in most seed exchanges. Like if you come to a Homesteaders Alliance meetup here where we do a seed exchange, I'm bringing out boatloads of seeds and some packets, and I'm like, go nuts, guys. And then if other people have seeds, I look at their seeds and I take what I want. But that's a really great way to get locally adapted seeds that'll do better in your area. And never, never, never underestimate the importance of talking to people who've been gardening in your area for years, for decades, about what varieties they grow, because they know what if early girls do well here or not. They know what kind of ground cherry to use. They know what kind of corn does best. They know all of those things. So basically, in summary, if you need to plant your garden or plan your kitchen garden, start by deciding what your goal is. Is it just sort of a garden with some things you like, in which case make a list of those things and grow them? Doesn't matter, right? If it's to really increase your food security and reduce your dependency on the grocery store, list what you eat. Out of that list, decide what you can grow. Out of that list, and how much. Out of that list, choose 3 things that are most important 3 things to do. Prioritize getting those started, and then interplant other things around it. Don't get wrapped around the axle about this can't plant next to that, by the way. If your soil is super healthy, a lot of the this can't plant next to that is hogwash. I think it has happened that way for some people, but I have absolutely put green beans and cucumbers next to each other and gotten a crop that was good, even though they say that's not supposed to happen. Likewise, they're like carrots should go with tomatoes. Here's the thing about companion planting is some things might interfere with each other because of their size and shading. Some things even chemically might interfere with each other. But more often what you're looking to do when you're companion planting is put something smelly there like basil so that pests are less likely to eat the tomatoes. Put something flowery that attracts pollinators right by your squash so that the bees come and pollinate your squash, right? And the flies and that sort of thing. So that's more how I like to think about it. And then think of their size and how much space they need and how much water they use and the watering environment they like to have. I'm more worried about that than if I'm specifically putting a carrot next to a tomato. And I will tell you that for years, I stuck to the gospel of what has to be what next to what. And I just realized that it's not necessarily true. So I hope that's demystified it. I try to make it as simple. I mean, I've gone off on some longer explanations, but really it's decide your goal. And then if you're replacing food, figure out how much you need, the varieties, prioritize 3, then interplant. And then the third thing to do is learn from your first year so that your next year is more refined. The other thing is don't forget to have fun. This is actually supposed to be fun, not like it's the end of the world as we know it and I need to grow all my food. No, stop it. Stop with that. Get that out of your head. Even if that is your primary motivator, let go of it. Have fun, especially if it's your first year. Stuff is going to die. Stuff is going to do well. You're going to forget to water something. Your road cover is going to blow off while you're out of town and Tactical didn't see it and all your Swiss charge is going to get wiped out that you were planning to eat in the early spring, right? Things like that happen in your garden. That's why we have a diverse garden. That's why we do things like play seed roulette. But don't let any of that stop you, and don't let it keep you from having fun. The first rule of homesteading is be fearless. And the more fearless you are, the more willing you are to try things, the better off you are. I just saw that Sandy, who does the East Tennessee Homesteaders Alliance, castrated a bunch of her own pigs. She's like, we don't know what we're doing. Watch us figure out how. That's a scary surgery because pig balls aren't on the outside. You have to cut slits and get them from the inside. So like, think of all the things that could go wrong there. And it's scary to do that, right? She's fearless. She did it. Have fun. Be fearless. If you like the show and want to support the work we're doing here, you can do it in 2 ways. 1, get your coffee at hollowroast.com. 2, consider becoming a member. Head over to livingfreeintennessee.com to find out more. With that, guys, go out, make it a great week.